Everybody, and welcome to the IAB and PWC Internet Advertising Revenue Report. This time the report is on the first half year of 2016 and Q2 of 2016. So my name is Christina Tregennis, and I'm the research director here at the IAB. And we're going to be doing this report today in three parts with three different speakers. So the first part is going to be a general overview of the top line numbers, and David Doty here, who is the EVP and CMO at the IAB, will be presenting that, and I will jump in and give present a couple of slides on the Q2 numbers and CPM numbers. The second part of this presentation will be a detailed analysis of the findings by David Silverman, who is a partner at PWC. And finally, the third part is going to be a presentation that goes beyond the typical U.S. numbers of Internet ad revenue and looks at global media and entertainment trends and projections. And this presentation is called the Global Entertainment and Media Outlook 2016 to 2020 report. And we have a wonderful guest speaker with us here today, Gregory Boyer, who is the partner at PwC's Entertainment, Media, and Communications practice, and he will be presenting that. Greg is the PwC's U.S. Entertainment and Media Consulting Leader and has over 18 years experience across entertainment, media, and communications industries in strategy, ops, customer service, and technology. He's responsible for managing large, complex change programs, integrating technology and media with a focus on business transformation. He specializes in helping clients reach breakthrough results by focusing on revenue enhancement, operation model design, performance improvement, business integration, and technology strategy. And we're very happy to have him with us here today.
Thank you.
So a couple of quick notes. After the presentation, we're going to have a Q&A from reporters followed by questions from our members. So please type your questions in at any time during the presentation in the chat feature on the right-hand side of the webinar. And we'll create a queue, and we're going to answer as many of these questions as possible following the presentation. If you still have any questions afterwards, feel free to reach out to either Laura Goldberg or to me, Christina Tregennis. So reporters can contact Laura Goldberg at laura.goldberg@iab.com, and IAB members can contact me, Christina with a K, at iab.com. That's Kristina at iab.com. And one more note, because we get this question 1,000,001 times during the presentation and after. Today's presentations, along with the final report, will be available immediately on the IAB site, immediately after the webinar ends. So at 12 noon, go to iab.com/adrevenuereport, and you will be able to find the reports and download them immediately. So let's move on to the exciting results, beginning with David Doty.
Thank you, Christina. And I'd like to start with a thank you to our friends at PwC for so many years of partnership on this. We have not only been tracking an industry, we've actually been seeing it build because of the results of your work. So thank you, David, for being here today, and thank you, Gregory, for joining us specifically for the global report. We really appreciate it. Let me start with the actual numbers of what we're seeing at the half year of the first half year of 2016. Digital advertising revenues have experienced nonstop double-digit growth for many years. This first half year is no exception to that. We're seeing the digital revenues climbing 19%, as you can see here in this chart, year over year in that burst, that blue burst, and hitting a record-setting $32.7 billion. And what you see here is ultimately the result of a compound annual growth rate in our industry from 2006 to the half year of 2016 of 14.2% over that 10-year period. That is impressive, and from what I know from research and from others that are in the industry and in other industries, that seems unmatched in any other industry, certainly in this time period. And when you just focus on media, If you look to the right, you'll see there a report from Nielsen. If you just focus on media, total media revenues, according to this Nielsen study, decreased by about 2% in that same period. So digital is definitely a positive outlier. But the ad revenue growth year over year, as I said, is the sort of ongoing story that we've been telling for a long time. The real story here is skyrocketing growth in mobile revenues. It's a tale of an inflection point, with mobile now getting 47% of all internet revenues. That's up 89% to $15.5 billion. Just last year at the same time, mobile revenues accounted for 30% of the pie. So seeing a jump from about a third of all ad digital dollars to nearly half is truly significant. That is driven by significant growth in video as well as social on mobile devices. We'll be looking further down at those numbers in a moment. You know, this is the result of consumption patterns. They inexorably set the pace for this. As Americans voraciously consume media on mobile devices, marketers are ensuring that their own messages are as relentlessly mobile as their consumers are. So let's drill down a little bit. Mobile search is up 105% to $7.4 billion. Desktop search is down 12% to $8.9 billion. Mobile video is up 178% to $1.6 billion, with desktop video up 13% as well to $2.3 billion. Mobile banner up 62% to $6 billion. And desktop banner is down 15% to $4 billion. So in that particular category, you can see the total number in that format in mobile now exceeds desktop. So as I said, the trends here reflect the mobile inflection point. Here in this chart, what you see is from full year 2012 to half year 2016, growth rates for mobile ad revenues. They have consistently been in double digits. The half year is in red. The black is the full year. Obviously, we don't have the full year for 2016. If you look at FY 2012 at the half year, you'll see that it was at $1.2 billion in mobile. It has grown 10 times that in just these 4 years to $15.5 billion. Let's drill down on some of the things we've already just talked about to get a bit more granular. But these will confirm the same trend lines that we've been talking about toward mobile, toward video, and toward search. I would call your attention to the broader display-related advertising section there in the center. Total display-related advertising is up 26% to $13.9 billion and accounts for 43% of all internet ad revenue. Banners, specifically, are up 18% to $10 billion in the half year 2016 and represent nearly a third of advertising revenue dollars. Those numbers are easier to look at in this chart here, where you can see video, banner, and search. Total ad revenues were up double-digit percentages when you add mobile with desktop. One of the big drivers of this, in addition to video, in addition to search, is social media advertising revenue. It is lifted particularly in this time period by mobile. What you see here in this chart is a 50% growth in every half year since 2012. So from the first half year of 2012 at $1.2 billion, we're now at $7 billion at the half year in 2016. And this inflection point leads us to think about presenting this information in a different way going forward. With mobile now accounting for nearly half of all revenue at 47%, we will change the way we report on formats. Previously, as you see here on the left, we used to break out, we track mobile as a separate format. But what we've realized is we can't do that anymore. What we have to do is look at the total distribution pie across the real formats. And you see that on the right-hand side. The distribution of total digital revenues, mobile plus desktop, will be how we present this in the future. And there what you can see is total search accounts for 50% of all ad revenue. Total banner accounts for 31%. Total video accounts for 12%. So all display related is at 43%. The remaining 8% goes to other, which is lead gen and classifieds. So let's put this into the broader media context. What you saw in the Nielsen report earlier on is the sort of like summary of it. But here you see that digital remains the largest media type and has shown double-digit growth over this period, while other media have seen slight growth or declines. So now I'd like to turn this over to Christina, who will take us through the Q2 2016 highlights. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, David. So looking at the Q2 2016 highlights, what we see is a very similar pattern. We're seeing an 18% growth in Q2 of 2016 as compared to Q2 2015. So internet ad revenues, including both desktop and mobile, have grown to $16.9 billion just in Q2 2016 alone. And when you compare that to Nielsen's reporting of total media revenues, you see that total media revenues have decreased by about 3% within that same time frame to about $29 billion. Now, looking more closely at these different types of media formats, we see that, once again, as I just mentioned, internet ad revenue has grown about 18% from Q2 of last year to Q2 of this year and is at $16.9 billion. But if you look at other traditional media types, we see that, again, these are either have grown, just by one digit or have actually decreased over that same time frame. So, once again, the internet continues its double-digit growth. Now, looking at CPMs, or price that one would pay to advertise in digital, what we're seeing is that display ads have actually increased in CPM by about 3 percentage points from January to June of this year, over the past half year. And we see in-stream video is flat down about 2%. But again, this is only looking at 6 months, so this could be seasonal, and we will have more data on that by the full year report, and we'll be able to trend this more clearly. But the key takeaway here is that in-stream video CPMs are much higher than display CPMs at this point. And looking again at CPMs across different categories in display, we see that across 8 different categories, we see pretty consistent CPMs to slight increases. And when we do a comparison of Q1 to Q2, we see that 7 out of 8 categories that have been tracked by Squad web costs have increased over time. And again, thanks to Squad web costs for graciously providing us this data. And we hope to have more clarity and more data as we see the quarters progress in the full year report. So at this point, I'm going to hand it back to David to talk about the key takeaways from the report.
Thank you, Christina. So I think we have made it pretty clear here that mobile is the story. And as consumer usage shifted to mobile, it's now reflected in marketers shifting their spend into mobile. Nearly all of that, nearly half of all internet ad dollars in the first half of 2016 were from mobile advertising. So that's 47% to be precise, and that's up, as I said earlier, from 30% just a year ago. ongoing double-digit growth across formats and platforms and digital persists in an otherwise flat or declining media market. And brand spend continues to rise. And we deduce this from the bullet points below there. There are upswings in video. There are upswings in display. There's upswings in impression-based revenue. And as Christina just explained, CPMs have also tended up over the last 6 months. And in summary, it's all about mobile in video, in search, in social, and in banners. So thank you. And now, David Silverman, a partner at PWC, who's really ultimately responsible for this work here, will take us through his insights on what this means for the industry.
Thank you, David Doty, and I'm very happy once again to be reporting these results, and thank you to the IAB for having partnered with PWC since the birth of the industry, and it's been exciting to track that growth over time. What I'm going to cover in the next 10 minutes is a little bit of our methodology as to how we get to our results. And then I will quickly go through the results, some of which David has already shared, and I'll focus in on a couple of points as well, points of focus. In terms of the survey scope, our focus is around collecting historical data from the companies that are selling internet advertising revenues or generating internet advertising revenues. So the core portion of our survey is really coming from the companies within the industry, and we appreciate the participation by those companies. It is extremely important that we continue to get that participation in order to make sure that the survey remains not only accurate and relevant, but we can expand on the various formats as well as the industry continues to evolve. We make the survey inclusive as possible, including all types of companies that are selling advertisements on the internet. And lastly, we maintain a very confidential process. So the companies that do participate, we will never release any individual company information. Only aggregate information is released in the report. With respect to our methodology, it begins with a database of companies within the industry. We update that database twice a year. We, of course, leverage the IAB's membership, which is comprised of most of the significant players within the industry. From that, we conduct a quantitative mailing survey to those companies and request various data points. And then we aggregate that information. We supplement it with information that's available publicly, primarily 10Qs, 10Ks, press releases. And for companies that are not participating and don't disclose public information, we'll seek other public sources and make conservative estimates where necessary. And then lastly, twice a year, we analyze the findings and report. So as David mentioned, half-year revenues went up 19.1% to $32.7 billion, or a $5.3 billion increase. Second quarter revenues, as Christina pointed out, was up 18.1%, approximately $2.6 billion more than it was a year ago, to $16.9 billion. And then lastly, Q1 to Q2 went from $15.9 billion to $16.9 billion, up 6.6%, or $1 billion. This is a chart that we've been including in our presentation every year, and you can see, as I mentioned earlier, when I say we've been tracking this since the inception, I wasn't kidding. We've literally been here since the beginning and tracking on a quarterly basis the revenues of the industry. And what you'll notice, a couple of things here, is that revenue in the current half year or the current quarter is 8 times greater than where it was at the top or the peak of the bubble back in 2000. Since 2003, we've had 12 years of double-digit growth, and only 1 year, which was a negative year, that wasn't double-digit growth. It was a slight decrease, and that was the year of a recession back in 2009. You can see that there are peaks in the fourth quarter. That's typical of advertising cycles, and you can see those peaks getting even sharper as the industry continues to mature. The growth in the industry has been propelled by evolution in the industry. So we can see that throughout this history, there's been many changes underlying internet advertising. It's not the same industry that it was back in 2000. For instance, the emergence of search, the emergence of networks and programmatic and different types of targeting, rich media and now video, and of course mobile and social. Throughout this timeline, all of these things have played a part in helping continue the double-digit growth rates. And as a result, this industry has a 19.3% compounded annual growth rate over the last 13 years, slightly higher than the growth rate in the first half of the year. One of the other things we noticed over time, we've noticed that about 53% of revenues come in the second half of the year. So while we don't forecast or predict what revenue is going to be in the future in this report, just using that mathematical equation, we can estimate that revenues could be somewhere in the mid to very high 60 billion to almost 70 billion range. We've all heard of the long tail, particularly in this industry. A lot of companies selling advertising or generating advertising revenues. But what we noticed from this survey is that most of that revenue comes in the head and the neck. About 10 companies making up almost 74% of half-year revenues. The next 15 companies generating about 10% of the revenues. And then the remaining companies, which are in the, of course, hundreds, make up the remaining 16% of half-year revenues. This concentration is fairly consistent with what we've seen throughout the last 10, 15 years, although the companies that make up the top 10 and certainly the top 25 have changed over time. With respect to format, as David Doty pointed out, the story is around mobile. 89% growth, approaching 50% share. It's about 47%. And that's really just about advertisers finally catching up to the eyeballs, right? So we've known that people have shifted to mobile devices over the last several years. Revenues had lagged behind it, and now we're beginning to see that finally catch up. As a result, these other formats listed here are solely desktop. And as a result, as people have migrated away from desktop onto mobile devices, we see declines in search, banner, although video, because of its strong growth, has actually continued to increase on even on the desktop. When we look at it as a percentage of overall revenue, again, other than mobile, all these formats listed on this slide are solely as they relate to desktop. You can see that there are declines in pretty much every category with the exception of mobile. Search going down from 37% in the prior year in the mid-40 range, a couple of years even prior, down to 27%. Display on the desktop down to 19% from 25% in the prior year. And then banner, which is a subset of display, down from 14% to 10%. And video, despite its growth, has remained unchanged at 7% on the desktop. Mobile has increased. As David pointed out, it was 30% at the half year. It was 35% for the full year of 2015, and now it's up to 47%. So you're probably now asking, how does mobile distribute amongst the formats? And we can see here that within that mobile category, the 47% mobile, 48% of 100% of the mobile is search-related, 39% is non-video display, 10% is video display, and 3% is other. So when we overlay that onto the traditional formats, you'll see that approximately 50% of the revenues is search, 31% relates to non-video display, 12% relates to video display, and 8% relates to the other categories. And we compare that to the prior year. The overall pie has grown, again, 19% growth. The only way to increase your share of that pie then is to grow faster than 19%. The only category that did that was video, which grew at 51% and increased its share from 9% to 12%. Underlying all of this is social media. Social media is the engine that is really driving some of our key trends. Over the last 3.5 years, it's demonstrated a 54% compounded annual growth rate. In the current year, it was up 57% from the prior half year. It's now $7 billion. It accounts for almost 50% of the overall growth from the prior half year to the current half year, and almost 100% of the non-search revenue growth in the industry. It's also a key driver that we've noted in not only mobile, but video and display on mobile devices. Pricing models, we've compared to the prior year. We noticed a slight increase in CPM-related revenues. When we track that over time, you can see that that slight increase is relatively consistent with what we've seen, where about 1/3 is being sold on a CPM-related basis and 2/3 on a performance-related basis. And with respect to the industries that are advertising on the internet, you can see that there's very little change here. Retail, financial services, and auto make up almost 50% of the revenues. And I guess not unsurprisingly, 2 of those 3 categories were amongst the highest CPM rates that Christina went over just a few minutes ago. That concludes the presentation, and I'll be welcome to address any questions after the final presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I want to say that your rigorous work in taking us through this also gives us a sense of the great credibility in this actual report. And I'd like to mention that it reflects something that we have been observing in our own trends here at IAB, which is that we've launched the mobile and video centers of excellence in response to what is surely a massive change in the industry. So we're keeping pace with that. For a more global view on the industry, as Christina mentioned earlier, we invited and we're pleased that he accepted to present here Gregory Boyer, who's a partner in entertainment, media, and communications at PWC, and he'll give us a global overview of what's going on.
Thanks, David.
Thank you, Gregory.
So why don't we start with a little bit of what the global entertainment outlook is for PWC. We've actually been producing this for 15 years. It's a breakdown of the forecast over the next 5 years for consumer as well as end user and advertising spending. We also do a 5-year look back. We like to see how we've done, but the key here is that it is a forecast. We actually published this year's report in June, so this is about 6 months. We're about halfway, just roughly less than halfway through the year, and then we're obviously working on next year's report, which gets launched in the first couple weeks of June as well. We provide data for 54 countries around the world, and what you see here is the different sectors that we break down across our analysis, with the U.S. compound annual growth rate over the forecasted 5 years off to the right. No surprise with internet advertising at the top of the list, and as you work your way down, you'll see some more traditional industries with probably more traditional growth rates in mind. Not surprising that some of the publishing are at the bottom with some lower growth rates, but there are some bright spots in between when you look at things like music, which has traditionally lagged a little bit but is on a little bit of a renaissance, as well as video games, which has shown a very strong resilience over the last couple of years, and we project that going forward. So I'm going to first start with some of the global insights across our analysis, and then we'll take a little bit of a dive into some of the advertising components, and we'll comment and try and pair back with some of the things that David talked about. The first is on a global basis. on a global level, we look at a projected industry growth rate of 4.4%. That's a little bit higher than last year's report, which was at 4.3%. So we're seeing some uptick just in the overall spend categories. When we look at the outlook, there's a significant number of differences as we look at both, and what you see here on the left-hand side, global spending by sector, as well as on the right, global spending by business model. Consumer has led the way in many years, but you do see a collapse in terms of, or a narrowing, I should say, between consumer spending and advertising spending, with advertising having a stronger CAGR over that period. Internet ads and access have the strongest growth rates over that period, followed by video entertainment, and then publishing lagging slightly. I mentioned some of the other categories like video games and music. While they make up a slower revenue base, or a small revenue base, I should say, they have pretty good growth rates. So in looking at the data, we identified 5 major trends going into this year. The first is, our data suggests that the young will propel entertainment and media growth through 2020, or 2020, I should say. If you look at this diagram, you'll see some of the faster growing countries off to the right in terms of higher growth, but you also see those with the markets with the most youthful populations, and the lower left quadrant being more developed countries with slower growth rates. We see that trend progressing, and we'll suggest that with data as we move through the presentation. The second is, much of the E&M industry is growing more global in practice, but the cultures and tastes remain distinctly local. And if you think around personalized content for each of the countries, whether it be in North America or whether it be in Middle East, North Africa, very different tastes, very different local content, very different consumption patterns, and we'll touch on that as well. The third trend is what we call the joy of bundles. The bundle as it exists today is certainly not dead, but we are seeing an integrated omnichannel type of offering. This includes everything from OTT and mobile that gets added to our traditional offerings. Well, if you think of broadcast television as an example, and you see less growth in terms of linear TV, you're seeing significant growth in other items that add to that omnichannel experience. The next is growth markets. We see a very big divergence in several factors, including regulation, degree of protection around privacy as an example, and the ease of access. So when we look at any of our growth categories, some of the factors that come into play is where to invest and how companies should invest, and ultimately the regulatory environment that they're presented with. So that presents a very different environment if you say Vietnam versus Argentina versus, say, North America. But ultimately, we're seeing a tremendous growth outside the U.S. that is occurring in a number of our different quadrants. And we'll touch on the different categories and how we've classified those regions in those categories. The last is what we call transforming with trust. The growth of technology and digitization, it's acting as a very powerful force, and it's breaking up a lot of the traditional relationships. But at the heart and at the core of all those relationships is trust with the consumer, and that's allowing a lot of nimble customers to have access to consumption patterns. So we'll talk about some of those developments as we get into it. And particularly that's relevant in terms of what you've just heard around mobile and video. So if you're a media company, where do you go from here, given where the market is headed? We see quite a bit of transition where other companies, whether they're in the technology space, whether they're in the communication space, quite frankly, whether they're in really outlying spaces, whether that be automobiles or other, looking to acquire entertainment and media-like capabilities. We've classified these in these 4 quadrants, which I'll break into on the next slide in more detail. The makers, which are really your content providers, examples, film and TV as an example. Maximizers, which include cable TV, theater chains. Module, which are really, think of B2B companies that operate behind the scenes, like audio tech and or tech stack companies. And then what we call as mashups or hybrids. And this is one that's the category that's probably most interesting, where you're seeing very diversified companies look at both vertical and horizontal integration across the supply chain. So some of the recent acquisitions that you see in the marketplace as well, where you see being able to move from full content and distribution type of services and the type of innovative products, the type of innovative operating models that can service a large amount of consumers. I mentioned the quadrants earlier. We break down the entertainment and media into 4 quadrants: mature, next wave, up-and-comers, and slow growth. As you can see by this diagram, the mature companies are growing at a rate you would expect at 3.3 on a CAGR basis over that 5-year period. The interesting categories are probably more within the next wave and the up-and-comers. Next wave includes your BRIC countries, China, Russia, India as an example. And then the up-and-comers, while they have smaller revenue bases, their growth rates are significant. So if you think of countries like Indonesia, Nigeria, Argentina, those growth rates are significant, and they're leapfrogging in some cases some of the different countries that are above. So if you look at a ranking across the top 20, we're seeing, while at the top end of the market, you developed countries still dominating that list. We're seeing, say, from 10 through 20 in overall size and revenue, entertainment, media. We're seeing some shuffling occur as higher growth countries move up the stack, so to speak. Sources of revenue. We talked a little bit about advertising and access and consumer. You'll see a comparison here between global and U.S. While advertising is growing or taking up a slightly less portion of the pie, I say the consumer in the U.S. You're seeing that the growth rate on a global basis is different compared to U.S. growth. So advertising growing faster if you look at the U.S. numbers versus global, but the consumer also leading the way slightly. Sources of growth from advertising. The first thing I would have to highlight is that video obviously is accounting for a large amount of traffic. So you saw a strong emphasis in the IAB report around video and mobile. Certainly there's a smaller amount of revenue coming from video today in terms of advertising, but that's a significant source of revenue moving forward, and you see a tremendous amount of focus there. You also see that a number of countries, including China, and we've highlighted it here, China, the UK, and Denmark, for the very first time have more revenue from digital advertising than non-digital advertising. And by 2020, we expect that to be true for no less than 11 markets. And on the left-hand side, you'll see some information around traffic, where places like China, Russia, and India have increased traffic, while in other areas you see less traffic. Overall, global data consumption on mobile devices projected to grow at 36%, not to be confused with revenue. This is really data consumption. I think the overall point is we're dealing in a world where there's massive amount of data being created for mobile devices. The statistics of the traffic with video and where we're headed, and the increasing attention and the ability to monetize the advertising dollars, and I think David just walked through some of that, will be key moving forward. The gap between consumer spending and advertising is closing. I mentioned this a little earlier. You see some of the growth rates here, U.S. spending by business model. You see that advertising and consumer line starting to track very close, and we expect it to cross over soon after 2020, with advertising probably taking over some level, or at least approaching consumer spending. On the right-hand side, what's rather interesting is you look at the advertising non-digital versus digital, and you see very flat growth on the non-digital side and very strong growth at 9.2% on the digital side. From a segment benchmarking perspective, both U.S. and global, on the left-hand side, you'll see that in the U.S. Is outperforming in the sectors of music and book publishing. It's in line with internet access throughout out-of-home advertising. But on the right-hand side, you'll see a number of industries where the growth rates are actually much more significant, or more significant on a global level. Cinema would be a great example. Film is certainly has an opportunity on a global basis and seeing more growth on a global basis. Video games as well, and some other categories like TV advertising are seeing a modest growth rate above U.S. So some of the advertising data. First, I would say our methodology is slightly different in terms of how we put together the outlook from a global basis. I won't cover all the definitions, but certainly if you're interested, if you go out to pwc.com, you'll find definitions for our outlook. But overall, we generally look at the keeping the advertising revenue within the sectors as we present the data. So here there's only really 3 sectors that do not include the advertising baked within their sectors, right? So internet, book publishing, and TV and video. The rest include the advertising revenue within the sector breakdown. So there's 5 key trends. I think we've already covered some in the IAB report. One is that advertising is growth where consumers are increasingly spending their time, particularly mobile. Internet advertising is the largest ad segment, fueled in part by television and video experiences, the personalization, tracking consumers' location and experience, and delivering those ads at the right time in the right place. 4, online ads have not replaced traditional ad revenues, but at the same time, that's where the growth is coming from. And we're seeing subscription models grow in popularity. If you think of the publishing industry, where they've been relatively decimated in recent years, subscription is becoming a more popular model than, say, an ad-supported model. Immersive and live experiences are growing in popularity through esports, concerts, and more creative hybrid type of ad opportunities. I think you'll see more of those emerge, and we'll probably have particularly more information there on our next report coming in June. The advertising mix, you look at internet advertising projected to gain 7% share, and digital advertising to fuel that growth. You see a number of different categories here. You see publishing decreasing. You see internet advertising increasing. Some of the others remaining relatively flat. That's not to suggest that internet advertising is gaining at the expense of publishing, but that certainly is occurring in some cases. Projected growth in U.S. internet advertising revenues by type of advertisement. We just went through some of this breakdown. You see some of the growth levels here on a CAGR for the next 5 years, and you'll see that almost in every case, you'll see that mobile has a significant multiple related to what I'll call wired and/or desktop experiences. And just the nature of the trajectory from left to right is accelerated. Video is leading the way in terms of just flat growth at 30.3% on a CAGR. As I mentioned earlier, I think mobile and video will continue to dominate the attention. If you look at the bottom right-hand quadrant there, where video advertising, not related to broadcasters, is projected to represent 77% of total online video ad revenue, which represents the shifting toward alternative video consumption platforms. So think OTT, think streaming video, and how that's going to be impacting ultimately the data moving forward. Lastly, when we look at it from a global perspective, we've categorized most of the countries and their growth rates across 3 categories into a number of buckets. The first is the top 10 largest advertising countries. The second will be the fastest growing, and then the countries that actually fit into both categories. So you'll see highlighted here places like China and Indonesia, which fit both categories, but also that in the top 10 fastest growing, very interesting countries like Argentina, Turkey, and Nigeria as examples of where growth is actually occurring on a global basis. Now, that's not to mean the mature markets still have the bulk of the revenue base, but a lot of the investments that we see from many of the entertainment media companies are occurring on a global level. And lastly, just to bring back some of the larger trends, I think the data will continue to progress as we look for our next year of outlook, but the demography in terms of youth, ultimately the ability to serve quality content will be key and reach great customers. How those business models change around bundles, the actual growth in terms of where it's coming from a market perspective, and lastly, the transformation of products and services to meet the new consumer demands. So that's what we have here today. I would add there's a tremendous amount of more data in our ultimate outlook report, and most of it's available online at PWC. So there's, if you're interested in going and looking at that, please visit the website. You can drill down into very country-specific and/or category-specific level detail if you're interested in that.
Thank you, Gregory. I find it always fascinating, of course, not just to look at the revenue report in terms of the broader media context in the the U.S., but also in terms of the broader media context in the world, because similar to the fact that mobile, video, social are all growing, I think at a faster rate than others. I think we're going to see some of that in some of the other countries in the world.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Gregory. Christina, would you take us to the next stage?
Thanks. So thank you everyone for these presentations. And at this point, we'll be taking questions. So for those of you on the line on the webinar, please feel free to type in your questions in the chat box, and we will answer as many as we can. And again, if you come up with a question afterwards, you can always email Laura Goldberg or I, and the email addresses are on the screen that you're looking at right now. So let's start out with the first question, but we're going to put you on mute for 2 seconds while we just pull that up on the screen. Okay, so the first question we have is there any information on how digital audio ad revenue is doing?
So as from digital audio, we have not yet tracked that and provided it in the report. We've started to track it, but we're going to wait until the end of the year in our year-end report to provide a number within the report. Hopefully we'll have that comparative as well.
And I'd add one thing. This is David Doty. Thank you, David Silverman. I'd add one thing, which is that IAB actually has done a podcast upfront in September for the last couple of years in recognition of the growing interest and dollars spent in audio. So we are very interested in working with you in getting to that audio number for the full year. So thank you.
Great. The next question we have is, what % of the mobile increase is from social?
That's a great question. Unfortunately, we don't break that out as part of our survey, but anecdotally, I will say that certainly social is highly mobile and is driving mobile increases as well as other factors in addition to social. But certainly the movement of eyeballs to mobile devices are a part of that is time spent on social sites.
So the next question is, how do we define mobile video revenue, video ads versus ads against video? David Silverman, you're
Yep. So
well aware of that.
The report that will be released on the IAB website shortly will include the definitions of all formats. And so we use the definitions per working with the IAB and helping define the various categories and formats. So you'll find that definition there, but it's just briefly, I'll give you a highlight. It's advertising that appears before, during, or after digital video content in a video player. And video overlays are also categorized as digital video advertising. These include small ads that appear on the top of digital content.
Okay, we have a question because of Gregory. Where can we get country-specific reports? Gregory.
So we have that data, some of that data online. So if you go to pwc.com, Entertainment Media Outlook, you'll find some of that information online. There's also contact information where you can subscribe to the actual data tool we have, which you can pull down data for every specific country we have in the report.
And we will point you to that from IAB.com as well. because as soon as this webinar is over, you will have all these presentations up there, and one of the pointers will be toward PWC.com. I think that's about it for now. Give us 1 second. All right, so we have one question on the share of ad revenue in video, on how much is coming from different quote-unquote walled gardens, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, etc. David Silver?
Yeah, another good question. Unfortunately, it's not something that we're tracking as part of the report, so unfortunately can't provide you that answer.
Does anybody have any more questions? If you do, feel free to type them in the chat box. Okay, well, we got one. Thanks anyways, with a smiley face. So if we have no more questions coming in, then we will be concluding this webinar. So once again, go to IAB.com/ad revenue report, and you can download all of the presentations that you just saw today, including the IAB PWC ad revenue report itself. And again, if you have any more questions after we close the webinar, feel free to email either me, Christina with a K, at IAB.com, or if you're a member of the press, to email Laura Goldberg, which, again, the email address is on your screen right now, laura.goldberg@IAB.com. And with that, I'd like to thank all of our presenters for these wonderful presentations, and I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today. And that concludes our webinar. Thanks, everybody.